My dad died on a Tuesday. 1 week later, I found a letter in the back of his closet that he had apparently spent years making sure I would never see. I almost threw it away without opening it. I wish I could say I respected his privacy. The truth is, I was angry. Not normal angry. Not I miss my dad. And I'm frustrated with the universe angry. I was angry at him for dying. Angry that he had spent the last year telling me everything was going to be okay when it obviously wasn't. Angry that he had smiled through chemotherapy, joked with the nurses, and told me not to cancel my plans because cancer doesn't get to decide your schedule. And mostly, I was angry because he had left me with so many unanswered questions. So when I found the envelope, I opened it, and I wish I hadn't. Or maybe I wish I had opened it sooner. I'm still not sure. My dad was 63 when he died. He had lung cancer, although he never smoked a day in his life. The doctors couldn't really explain it. By the time they found it, it had already spread. For the first few months, he fought like someone who genuinely believed he could out-stubborn cancer. He made jokes about it. He called chemotherapy the expensive hangover. When his hair started falling out, he shaved his head and told my mom he finally looked like the villain in a low-budget action movie. That's who he was. He was the guy who could make a joke at the worst possible moment. Growing up, I thought he was fearless. As an adult, I realized he wasn't fearless. He was just really good at making everyone else feel safe, even when he was terrified. My parents had been married for 38 years. My mom was with him through everything. I was their only child. So when the doctors eventually told us there wasn't anything else they could do, my dad didn't cry. My mom did. I did. My dad just nodded. Then he asked the oncologist whether he could still watch the Yankees games. The doctor actually laughed. My dad looked at me afterward and said, "See? Still got a sense of humor." That was about 3 weeks before he died. The last week was different. He got weaker very quickly. He stopped eating much. He slept almost all day, but every time he woke up, he'd ask whether I had eaten. That sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly how he was. He could be dying and still worry that I hadn't had lunch. The night before he died, I sat beside his bed. He was barely conscious. I held his hand. I told him I loved him. He squeezed my hand. Then, after a long silence, he whispered something I couldn't understand. I leaned closer. "What?" He tried again. I heard, "Closet." I thought he was confused. "What about the closet?" He didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. I asked him again. Nothing. I didn't think about it afterward until the following morning. He died at 6:17 a.m. My mom was holding his hand. I was sitting on the other side of the bed. There was no dramatic final sentence, no movie moment. He just took a breath, then another, and then he didn't. I don't know how to describe what that feels like. 1 second, you're sitting next to your father. The next second, you're sitting next to a body that looks exactly like him but somehow isn't him anymore. My mom kissed his forehead. I couldn't move. I remember staring at his hand, his wedding ring, the little scar on his thumb from when he cut it opening a box when I was a kid. All these tiny details suddenly became unbearable. The funeral was 4 days later. People said the usual things. He lived a good life. He's not suffering anymore. He's in a better place. I know people mean well when they say these things. But when you're grieving, sometimes you want someone to say, "This is horrible. I'm sorry. There is nothing I can say to make it better." Because that's the truth. After the funeral, my mom stayed with my aunt for a few days. I went back to my parents' house to start sorting through things. I hated doing it. Every drawer felt like an invasion. His wallet, his old watches, receipts, reading glasses, half-finished crossword puzzles, a grocery list with coffee, written in his handwriting. I found myself touching everything, like touching his things could somehow keep him here. On the 7th day after he died, I decided to clean his closet. That was when I remembered his last word, closet. I don't know why. Maybe my brain was looking for meaning. Maybe I just wasn't ready to accept that it had been random. His closet wasn't particularly interesting. Shirts, jackets, old shoes, a suitcase, some boxes. I started pulling things down. At the very back, behind a stack of winter blankets, there was an old cardboard box. It was sealed with packing tape. On the top, in my dad's handwriting, were 4 words: "Do not give to him." I knew immediately. I just stood there staring at it for maybe 5 minutes. My first thought was that it contained money. My second thought was that it contained something embarrassing. My third thought was that maybe my dad had written down something about my childhood that he'd never told me. I almost left it alone. Then I saw the envelope. It wasn't inside the box, it was tucked underneath it. A plain white envelope. My name was written across the front. Not my nickname. My full name. Underneath it were the words, "Do not open." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my dad had spent 63 years knowing exactly how to make me do something. If he had written, "Please open this," I probably would have put it down, but "Do not open." That was basically an invitation. I sat on the closet floor. The house was completely silent. I held the envelope for a long time. Then I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The first line was, "If you're reading this, I'm already dead." I stopped. I couldn't breathe for a second. I kept reading. The letter wasn't long, maybe 2 pages, and the first half wasn't really a letter. It was instructions, where the insurance documents were, which accounts existed, what needed to be canceled, which bills were on autopay. He had even written down the password to the old laptop. My dad had apparently prepared for his death in far more detail than any of us realized. Then I reached the part that changed everything. He wrote, "There is something I need you to know, but I don't want you to know it while I'm alive." I read that sentence 3 times. Then, "You are going to be angry with me. That's okay. I'd rather have you angry with me than spend the rest of your life angry with yourself." I stopped again. I thought maybe he was talking about the cancer. Maybe he had known how serious it was. Maybe he had lied about his prognosis. But then I read the next sentence and I realized this wasn't about cancer. It was about me. "When you were 19, you thought I didn't support your decision to leave home. I did. I remembered that. I'd gotten accepted into a college several states away. I wanted to go. My dad had argued with me. He told me I was rushing into things. I thought he wanted me to stay close. We fought for weeks. Eventually, I left. I barely spoke to him for the first semester. It was one of the biggest regrets of my life. But apparently I had been wrong about something. He wrote, "I wasn't trying to stop you from leaving. Then, I was trying to protect you from something I couldn't explain." I stared at the page. Then came a name I hadn't heard in years. Someone from my childhood. Someone I had completely forgotten. And suddenly memories started coming back, not all at once. Little pieces, a house, a driveway, a man standing near a garage, my dad arguing with someone, my dad telling me never to go there alone. I'd always thought those memories were unrelated. They weren't. According to the letter, my dad had discovered something when I was 18, something involving a family member, something he believed could have put me in danger. He never told me because he was afraid that if he did, I'd confront the person myself. Instead, he quietly cut contact. He made excuses. He changed family plans. He stopped letting me visit certain relatives, and when I complained that he was controlling me, he let me believe that. He took the blame, because it was easier than telling me the truth. Then I reached the sentence that broke me. "I know you thought I was ashamed of you." I started crying, because I had thought exactly that. For years. There had been a period in my early 20s when my relationship with my dad was terrible. I thought he was disappointed in me. I thought he didn't like the person I'd become. I thought he wanted a different child, and apparently none of that was true. He wrote, Every time you thought I was pushing you away, I was trying to give you more room to become yourself. Then, I failed at explaining that. I put the letter down. I couldn't read anymore. I sat on the floor of his closet and cried harder than I had at his funeral, because grief is strange. You think you're grieving the person you lost. Then suddenly you realize you're also grieving the version of the relationship you thought you had. I spent years believing my dad didn't understand me, and now I was discovering that maybe he understood me too well. There was one final paragraph. I almost didn't read it. It said, "Please don't hate the people I protected you from. Don't spend your life trying to punish anyone. I don't want my death to become the reason you stop living. Then, if you remember anything about me, remember this. I was never disappointed in you. And finally, I was proud of you every single day. I just wasn't always brave enough to say it." That destroyed me. Because my dad wasn't a sentimental man. He never said things like that. He showed love by fixing things, changing your oil, making sure you had enough gas, calling to ask if you got home safely, leaving $20 in your coat pocket. He wasn't good at saying "I love you," so I learned to hear it in other ways, but somehow, even knowing that, I still needed him to say it. And he finally did, just not while he was alive. There was one more sheet of paper. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my mom. I almost didn't read it, but I did, and I wish I hadn't. Because it explained something else, something my mom had never told me. My dad knew, 6 months before his diagnosis, that something was wrong. He had symptoms. He ignored them. Not because he didn't care, because he was afraid. He wrote that he didn't want to tell my mom until he knew for certain. By the time he finally went to the doctor, the cancer was advanced. My mom had spent the last year blaming herself. She thought she should have noticed. She thought she should have forced him to go sooner. The letter said, "None of this was your fault." Then, please don't let her blame herself. Sat there holding the letter and realized something. My dad had been trying to protect everyone until the very end, even from himself, even from the truth, even from the consequences of his own decisions. I called my mom. She answered immediately. "Did you find something?" I didn't know how she knew. Maybe my voice gave it away. I said, "Dad left us letters." Silence. Then she asked, "Did you read yours?" Yes, another silence. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I laughed through my tears. "No," she said. "Good." I actually laughed. Then she started crying. She told me she had known about the letters, not what they said, just that they existed. My dad had told her shortly before he died that there was something in the closet. He told her not to look. He wanted me to find it myself. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Your father spent his whole life trying to make sure you never had to carry what he carried." I don't know if that's entirely true. Maybe parents aren't capable of protecting their children from everything. Maybe sometimes they make mistakes while trying. Maybe my dad should have told me some of these things years ago. Maybe I deserved the truth, but I also understand him differently now. The last thing he gave me wasn't an explanation. It was permission. Permission to stop blaming myself. Permission to stop wondering whether he was disappointed in me. Permission to stop replaying every argument we'd ever had. And strangely, permission to be angry with him. Because the letter didn't say he was perfect. It admitted he wasn't. He wrote, "I made decisions for you that I probably shouldn't have made. I kept secrets because I thought I knew what was best. Sometimes I was wrong. Please don't turn me into a saint just because I'm gone." That line sounds exactly like him. I actually smiled. Then I cried. Again, it's been a few weeks. Now I'm still sorting through his things. Haven't thrown away his old jackets. I probably won't for a while. My mom has the letters now. We decided we're going to read them together eventually. Not yet, we're not ready, but something has changed for years. I thought my dad died without knowing how much I loved him. Now I realize I was wrong. He knew. Maybe he knew better than anyone. And there is one thing I keep thinking about. The night before he died, when he whispered, "Closet." Maybe he was trying to tell me about the letter. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe It was just a random word from someone who was very sick, I'll never know. But I choose to believe he was trying to leave me one last thing. Not an inheritance, not money, not some family secret. Just the truth, and maybe that's why he didn't want me to read it while he was alive, because if he had handed me that letter and watched me read those words, I would have seen him differently. I would have cried. He would have cried. And he probably would have made some terrible joke to make me stop. Instead, he waited until he was gone, which was very, very him. I spent years thinking my dad's greatest failure was that he didn't say what he felt. Now I think I understand. Some people don't know how to say I love you. They build it into everything they do. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you spend enough time looking back to finally see it.